Some secrets are meant to stay buried forever. But when 14-year-old Apache boy Kiona rescued a dying horse from the desert, he unknowingly awakened a mystery that would shatter everything he believed about his family's past. The horse he named Kaya was no ordinary animal. She led him through forgotten trails to places that seemed to call to her. One fateful day, she brought him to an abandoned cabin hidden deep in the wilderness. There, she clawed desperately at the earth until ancient wood gave way beneath her hooves. What emerged from that dark hole would change Kiona's life forever. A chest filled with scrolls and artifacts, written in symbols so old that even his tribe's wisest elders fell silent when they saw them. These weren't just old papers, they were messages from his ancestors, revealing the location of sacred burial grounds and relics of unimaginable power. But why had this horse led him to such a dangerous discovery? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Mescalero Apache reservation as Kiona walked toward the corral where Kaya waited. At 14, he stood tall for his age, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders in the traditional way his grandmother, Rosa, insisted upon. His eyes held a depth that seemed older than his years. "Kiona, bring some water for the horses before you go riding," Rosa called from the kitchen window. At 72, she moved with surprising grace, her silver hair braided down her back, adorned with turquoise beads. "Yes, grandmother," Kiona replied in Apache, then switched to English. The old ways and new words lived side by side in their household. His cousin Miguel, who worked at the casino in town, called the old traditions backward thinking, but Kiona found comfort in Rosa's stories about their ancestors. "Your bloodline carries special gifts," she would say. "Your great-great-grandfather Ayana could speak to the spirits of the four-legged ones." 3 months ago, Kiona had found Kaya collapsed near Devil's Canyon, her ribs showing through dull coat, flies buzzing around infected cuts. Around her neck had been an old leather bridle, bearing intricate Apache symbols burned into the leather. Rosa had examined it carefully. "These symbols are very old," she had murmured. "Older than anything I learned from my grandmother." When he posted notices around the reservation, no one claimed her. It was as if she had materialized from the desert itself. Dr. Martinez, the tribal veterinarian, pronounced her basically healthy once they treated her wounds. From the moment Kiona brought her home, Kaya had acted like she belonged there. She knew the property layout, understood Rosa's Apache commands, and had an uncanny ability to find things. When Rosa lost her turquoise ring in the garden, Kaya had walked directly to the spot and pawed until Kiona looked. The ring lay buried under 2 inches of soil. "That horse has medicine," Rosa had declared. "Strong medicine." Joseph Crowfeather, one of the tribal elders, had examined Kaya's bridle with troubled eyes. "These markings are guardian signs, very sacred, very powerful." Joseph had studied the area where Kiona found her. "Your great-great-grandfather used to ride through this country. My grandfather told stories about Ayana and his spirit horse, said that horse could find hidden paths no one else knew existed. According to stories, Ayana had been the last of the traditional guardians, protectors of sacred Apache sites. He had died defending their people, his spirit horse disappearing into the mountains. "You think Kaya might be—" Kiona had started. Joseph held up his hand. "That horse found you for a reason. Your bloodline carries responsibilities that skip generations, waiting for the right person at the right time." The reservation faced constant pressures: budget shortfalls, unemployment, young people leaving for cities. There was pressure to lease land to ranchers or consider mining proposals that would damage sacred sites. "The white world keeps pushing," Rosa often said. "They want our land, our water, our minerals. They offer money, but money disappears. Land is forever." As they rode toward the high mesa country, Kiona reflected on his life. School felt irrelevant. Algebra and American history seemed disconnected from the world he knew. Where his cousin, Miguel saw limitations. Kiona saw connections to the land, to ancestors, to a way of life that had sustained Apache people for centuries. Kaya had an uncanny ability to find interesting places, leading them off established trails to discover ruins, abandoned mine shafts, or natural formations that seemed almost sacred. Yesterday, she had led him to a hidden grove where ancient apple trees still grew. These trees were planted by our people long ago, Rosa had explained. When the government forced us onto the reservation, families hid food sources in the mountains. As they rode higher into rough country, Kaya's behavior became more alert. Her ears swiveled constantly, testing the air with flared nostrils. Ahead, partially hidden by juniper trees and fallen rocks, stood the weathered remains of a log cabin. The roof had collapsed, wild vines covering the structure, but the frame remained intact. Kaya moved forward slowly, then dismounted at a fallen log and began pawing at the ground with increasing urgency, dirt flying from beneath her hooves. "What are you doing?" Kiona approached cautiously. Kaya's digging had exposed rotted floorboards from the cabin's porch. But as she continued, something else appeared. An old wooden chest, its iron hardware green with age but intact. "How did you know this was here?" he asked, but Kaya had stepped back, watching expectantly. Kiona grasped the chest's handles and pulled. It was heavy but manageable. The lid bore intricate Apache symbols similar to those on Kaya's bridle, but more elaborate. His heart raced. With trembling hands, he opened the chest. Inside were ancient scrolls covered in symbols he couldn't read, maps drawn on animal hide showing familiar geographic features, and artifacts made of stone, bone, and metal that looked incredibly old. One item caught his attention, a leather journal with English writing, on the cover in faded ink, "For the next guardian." The first page contained a message that made his world shift. "To my descendant who will find this chest, the time has come for the guardian traditions to awaken again. The horse who led you here carries the spirit of those who came before. Listen to her, trust her. The sacred sites must be protected now more than ever. Your bloodline has been chosen for this responsibility. Use these tools wisely, for our people's survival depends on it." Ayana Crow, dancer, last guardian of the 4 sacred places, 1886. Kiona stared at the page repeatedly. Ayana Crow, dancer, his great-great-grandfather. The chest had waited here for almost 150 years, and somehow Kaya had known exactly where to find it. He looked up at the horse, who watched him with intelligent eyes. For a moment he saw ancient wisdom there, as if someone else looked back through Kaya's gaze. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew all along." The sun was sinking toward the western mountains. He secured the chest across Kaya's saddle with rope and headed home, his mind racing with questions. As they approached the house, Rosa emerged from the kitchen. When she saw the chest, her expression changed immediately. She examined the carved symbols on the lid with reverence. "Where did you find this?" she asked quietly. "Kaya led me to it. It was buried under an old cabin." Kiona's voice was barely a whisper. "Grandmother, I think this belonged to Ayana." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She placed her weathered hand on the chest's lid, tracing the symbols. "I have been waiting my whole life for this day," she said. "My grandmother told me stories, said someday the Guardian's tools would return to our family when they were needed most." "What does it mean?" Kiona asked. Rosa looked at him with pride and sadness. "It means your childhood is over, grandson, and your real education is about to begin." That evening, Rosa lit sage and sweetgrass in the traditional way, filling their small living room with sacred smoke. She had called Joseph Crowfeather, and the old man arrived just as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. His weathered face was grave as he examined the contents of Ayana's chest by lamplight. "I have not seen these symbols since I was a boy," Joseph said, his voice barely above a whisper. He held up the first scroll, a piece of hide covered in intricate markings that seemed to dance in the flickering light. My grandfather showed me drawings like these, but he said the originals were lost forever. Rosa sat cross-legged on the floor beside the coffee table where they had spread the artifacts. "Tell him what your grandfather said about the Guardians." Joseph's hands trembled slightly as he set down the scroll. "The Apache people have always had protectors, not just warriors who fought enemies, but spiritual guardians who watched over sacred places. These guardians could speak with spirits, call upon natural forces, and see things hidden from ordinary people." Kiona leaned forward, drawn by the old man's words. "What kind of sacred places?" "4 sites that form a protection around our ancestral lands," Joseph replied. "Each one holds different power: earth, air, fire, and water. When all 4 are properly maintained by a guardian, they create a spiritual barrier that keeps our people safe." Rosa nodded slowly. "My grandmother said Ayana was the last true guardian. When he died fighting the cavalry in 1886, the knowledge went with him. The 4 sites have been unprotected ever since." Joseph picked up another scroll and began to decipher some of the symbols. His knowledge of the old writing was limited, but he could make out certain words. "This one speaks of the first site, a place where water springs from stone. It says the guardian must perform ceremonies there to maintain the spiritual connection. And this?" Kiona held up a map drawn on animal hide. It showed geographical features he recognized: the mountains around the reservation, the river that ran through the valley, landmarks he knew from his rides with Kaya. Joseph studied the map carefully. "These markings show the locations of all 4 sacred sites, but they're hidden, protected by natural barriers. Only someone with the proper spiritual preparation could find them." Rosa stood and walked to the window, looking out at the corral, where Kaya stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky. "That horse found the chest for a reason. She's been preparing Kiona, leading him to places of power, helping him develop his connection to the land." "You think Kaya is—" Kiona began. "I think," Joseph interrupted gently, "that your great-great-grandfather's spirit has been waiting a long time to pass on his responsibilities. The Guardian's power doesn't die. It waits for the right person in the right bloodline at the right time." As if responding to their conversation, Kaya whinnied from the corral. The sound was haunting, almost like a human voice calling across great distances. All 3 of them turned toward the window. "She knows we're talking about her," Rosa observed. Joseph gathered the scrolls carefully. "There's more here than I can translate tonight. But this much is clear: the 4 sacred sites need to be reactivated. The spiritual protection they provide has been dormant for over a century." "Why now?" Kiona asked. "Why is this happening now?" Before Joseph could answer, they heard the rumble of heavy vehicles on the reservation's main road. Rosa pulled back the curtain and frowned. "Trucks. Big ones. Heading toward the tribal office." Joseph's expression darkened. "The mining company. They've been pressuring the tribal council for months about surveying rights. They want to look for copper deposits on reservation land." "What does that have to do with—" Kiona stopped as understanding hit him. "The sacred sites. They're in areas the mining company wants to survey." Rosa nodded grimly. "Your ancestor hid those sites for a reason, grandson. Some places are too important to disturb." Joseph stood slowly, his joints protesting. "The tribal council meets tomorrow night about the mining proposal. There's a lot of pressure to accept their offer. They're promising jobs, revenue, development. That could help our people. But if they start digging," Kiona began, "they could destroy sites that have been sacred for centuries," Rosa finished. "Places your great-great-grandfather died protecting." That night, Kiona lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind churning with questions and possibilities. Through his window he could see Kaya in the corral, standing alert as if keeping watch. The horse hadn't eaten since they returned from finding the chest, and she seemed restless in a way Kiona had never seen before. Around midnight he heard soft tapping at his window. Kaya stood directly outside, her intelligent eyes reflecting. Starlight. She was trying to get his attention. Kiona dressed quickly and slipped outside. Kaya moved immediately toward the trail that led into the high country, looking back to make sure he was following. He saddled her by moonlight, and they rode into the darkness. This time, Kaya led him to a completely different area, a box canyon. He had never explored. At the canyon's end, a natural spring bubbled from a crack in the rock face. The water formed a small pool before disappearing underground. Even in the darkness, Kiona could sense something powerful about this place. Kaya approached the spring and drank, then stepped back and looked at Kiona expectantly. As he knelt beside the pool, images flashed through his mind. Not quite dreams, not quite memories. He saw Apache people performing ceremonies at this exact spot. He saw his great-great-grandfather Ayana, a tall man with braided hair and eyes that held deep wisdom, standing where Kiona now knelt. "The first sacred site," Kiona whispered, understanding flooding through him. This was one of the 4 places marked on Ayana's map. Kaya had brought him here to show him what was at stake. The visions continued. He saw mining equipment destroying the spring, turning the sacred pool into a muddy pit. He saw the spiritual connection that had protected his people for generations being severed forever. And he saw the consequences. His tribe scattered, their culture lost, their connection to ancestral wisdom broken permanently. "You want me to protect this place," he said to Kaya. The horse nickered softly, as if agreeing, when they returned. Home before dawn, Rosa was waiting in the kitchen with hot coffee. "You found the first site," she said. "It wasn't a question." Kiona nodded. "Kaya showed me, and I saw what will happen if the mining company gets permission to survey. They'll destroy everything." Rosa set down her coffee cup with hands that shook slightly. "Then it's true. The guardianship has awakened in you. Your great-great-grandfather's spirit is guiding you through that horse. What am I supposed to do? I'm 14 years old. How can I stop a mining company? The same way Ayana protected our people," Rosa replied, "by learning to use the gifts you've inherited, by finding and reactivating all 4 sacred sites, by becoming the guardian our ancestors intended you to be." Outside, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. In a few hours, the tribal council would meet to discuss the mining proposal. And somewhere in the desert, ancient powers were stirring, waiting for a young Apache boy to accept a destiny he had never imagined. Kaya stood in the corral, no longer the rescued horse he had found 3 months ago. In the growing light, she looked like what she truly was, a bridge between worlds, carrying the wisdom of the past into an uncertain future. The dreams began that very night. Kiona found himself standing in a vast landscape that looked like the reservation, but somehow different, older, wilder, with buffalo grazing in valleys where cattle ranches now stood. A tall Apache man approached. Him, wearing traditional buckskin clothing and carrying a staff carved with intricate symbols. "You are my blood," the man said, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "I am Ayana, and I have been waiting for you." In the dream, Ayana showed him a circular stone disc covered in markings, the medicine wheel from the chest. "This will guide you to each sacred site," his ancestor explained. "But first, you must learn to see with spiritual eyes." Kiona woke with the dream vivid in his memory. He dressed quickly and retrieved the medicine wheel from the chest. In daylight, it looked like an ordinary carved stone, but when he held it and concentrated, he felt a subtle pull toward the northwest, a different direction from the spring Kaya had shown him the night before. "Another site," he whispered. Rosa found him in the kitchen, studying the wheel intently. "The dreams have started," she observed, pouring herself coffee. "You knew they would. Your great-great-grandfather visited my dreams when I was young," she said. "He told me to watch for signs in our bloodline. When the right person came of age, the guardian teachings would return." After breakfast, Kiona saddled Kaya and followed the medicine wheel's guidance. The stone grew warm in his hand. As they rode northwest, cooling when they deviated from the correct path. Kaya seemed to understand their purpose, moving with confidence through terrain that grew increasingly rugged. They climbed into high country, where ancient pines clung to rocky slopes. The medicine wheel led them to a narrow canyon, where a waterfall cascaded over red sandstone cliffs. Behind the falling water, partially hidden by mist and shadow, Kiona glimpsed the opening to a cave. Kaya refused to approach the waterfall directly. Instead, she found a narrow ledge that allowed them to reach the cave from the side. The passage was just wide enough for the horse, testament to Kaya's supernatural knowledge of these hidden places. The cave opened into a vast chamber lit by shafts of sunlight filtering through cracks in the ceiling. The walls were covered with ancient petroglyphs, spirals, animals, human figures, and symbols that matched those on Ayana's scrolls. This was clearly a sacred place, used by Apache people for ceremonies over countless generations. As Kiona dismounted and approached the walls, images flashed through his mind again. He saw generations of Apache shamans performing rituals in this very chamber. He saw his great-great-grandfather as a young man, learning the guardian traditions from an elderly medicine man. Most powerfully, he saw the spiritual energy that flowed through this place, a bright stream of power that connected to the other sacred sites. The second sight, he breathed, understanding flooding through him. When they returned home, Miguel's pickup truck was parked in the driveway. Kiona's cousin stood on the porch talking to Rosa, his expression skeptical as always. At 25, Miguel had embraced the modern world completely. He wore expensive clothes, carried the latest smartphone, and spoke dismissively of traditional Apache ways. "Kiona," Miguel called out as they approached. "Grandmother's been telling me some interesting stories about your new hobby." "It's not a hobby," Kiona replied, dismounting carefully. He had learned not to share too much with Miguel, whose response to anything spiritual was mockery. "Right. So you think you're some kind of mystical guardian now?" Miguel's tone was condescending. "And that horse is your spirit guide or something?" Rosa stepped between them. "Show respect, Miguel. There are things happening here that you don't understand. What I understand is that the tribal council is meeting tonight about a deal that could bring millions of dollars to the reservation. Real money that could build schools, improve housing, create jobs. But instead of focusing on that, you're encouraging Kiona to chase after ghost stories. Some things are more important than money," Rosa said firmly. Miguel laughed. But there was no humor in it. "Easy to say when you're not watching young people leave every year because there's no future here. When you're not seeing families struggle to pay for basic needs." Kiona felt a surge of anger. "You left. You got your casino job and your fancy truck, and now you look down on everything here." "I got realistic," Miguel shot back. "I learned that the world doesn't care about our legends and ceremonies. It cares about economic development and political power." That evening, the three of them attended the tribal council meeting in the community center. The room was packed with reservation residents, their faces reflecting the weight of difficult decisions. On one side sat representatives from Copper Ridge Mining Company, men in expensive suits with briefcases full of promises. On the other side sat tribal elders like Joseph, their weathered faces showing deep concern. The mining company's spokesman, a smooth-talking man named Peterson, presented their proposal. "We're offering a partnership that will benefit everyone," he said, clicking through a presentation filled with charts and dollar signs. "Our surveys show significant copper deposits on the eastern section of the reservation. We're prepared to offer substantial royalty payments, plus guaranteed employment for tribal members." Several council members asked questions about environmental protections and cultural site preservation. Peterson assured them that his company followed all federal regulations and would work around any identified cultural areas. "What about areas that haven't been officially designated?" asked Joseph. "Places that are sacred to our people but not recognized by government agencies." Peterson's smile never wavered. "If such sites are brought to our attention with proper documentation, we'll certainly consider adjusting our operations accordingly." Kiona's heart sank. The sacred sites Ayana had protected weren't in any government database. They existed in oral tradition, in spiritual knowledge that had been deliberately hidden from outsiders. After the formal presentation, council members debated among themselves. The arguments were passionate on both sides. Those supporting the mining deal spoke of desperate economic needs, limited opportunities for young people, and the necessity of engaging with the modern economy. Those opposing it worried about environmental damage, cultural destruction, and the irreversible nature of industrial mining. "We need to think about our grandchildren," said council member Sarah Deertrack. "What kind of world are we leaving them? Money from mining will last a few years. Damaged land lasts forever. But what good is pristine land if our grandchildren have moved away because there are no jobs here?" countered Robert Standing Bear. "We need development that lets our people stay and prosper." The council voted to table the decision for 1 week, allowing time for more community input. As the meeting broke up, Kiona overheard Peterson talking quietly on his phone outside the building. "Tuesday's meeting was just a formality," Peterson was saying. "Our geological surveys are already scheduled to begin Monday morning. We'll have equipment on site regardless of their final vote. Easier to ask forgiveness than permission." Kiona's blood ran cold. The mining company planned to start surveying immediately, without waiting for tribal approval. They would likely begin in the eastern section, where the sacred spring was located. He found Rosa and Joseph by Rosa's truck. "They're starting Monday," he whispered urgently. "I heard Peterson on the phone. They're bringing equipment, whether the council approves or not." Joseph's face hardened. "Illegal, but not uncommon. By the time we could stop them through legal channels, they'd have done irreversible damage." "What can we do?" Rosa asked. Joseph looked at Kiona with ancient eyes that held both sadness and determination. "The legal system won't protect what matters most to us. It never has. But there are older laws, older powers. The guardian sites," Kiona said, understanding. "You found 2 already. The medicine wheel should lead you to the others. But time is running short, grandson. Once there, machines start digging, some damage can never be undone." As they drove home through the desert darkness, Kiona felt the weight of inherited responsibility settling on his shoulders. Somewhere out there, 3 more sacred sites waited to be found and reactivated, and somewhere else, mining equipment was being loaded onto trucks, preparing to violate land his ancestors had died protecting. Kaya whinnied from the horse trailer behind them, as if sensing his thoughts. In 3 days, everything would change. Saturday morning brought disturbing news. Joseph called before sunrise. Mining company trucks had been spotted on the access road leading to the eastern section of the reservation. "They're not waiting for Monday," his voice crackled through. Rosa's old phone. "They're moving equipment into position this weekend." Kiona felt panic rising in his chest. He wasn't ready for this. He had found only 2 of the 4 sacred sites, and he still didn't understand how to use the guardian powers Ayana had spoken of in his dreams. "We need to find the 3rd site today," Rosa said, reading his thoughts. She moved to the chest and withdrew a small leather pouch. Inside were pigments, red ochre, yellow clay, white chalk, and black charcoal. "These are the sacred paints your ancestor used for protection ceremonies." The paints looked ancient but had been perfectly preserved in their sealed pouch. Rosa mixed the pigments with water and began painting symbols on Kiona's forehead and cheeks, the same markings he had seen in his dreams of Ayana. "What do they mean?" Kiona asked, feeling the cool paint dry on his skin. "Connection," Rosa replied. "These symbols open pathways between the physical world and the spirit realm. They help you see what others cannot see, hear voices that others cannot hear." As she painted the final symbol, Kiona felt a subtle shift in his perception. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds carried further, and he could sense Kaya's presence, even though she was in the corral behind the house. The medicine wheel in his hand grew warm, pulling him toward the south. "She's ready to go," he said, somehow. Knowing Kaya was waiting for him, Miguel's truck pulled into the driveway as Kiona finished saddling Kaya. His cousin got out slowly, his usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. "I followed one of the mining trucks this morning," he said without preamble. "They're setting up a base camp near Devil's Canyon." "Why were you following them?" Rosa asked. Miguel shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what that Peterson guy said about proper documentation for sacred sites. Made me wonder what we might be losing without even knowing it." Kiona stared at his cousin in surprise. Miguel had never shown interest in Apache cultural sites before. "I want to come with you today," Miguel said suddenly. "Whatever you're really doing out there, I want to see it for myself." Rosa and Kiona exchanged glances, bringing Miguel along. "Could complicate things, but it might also be necessary. If the Guardian sites were going to be protected, more people needed to understand what was at stake." "You have to promise to keep an open mind," Kiona said. "I promise to try." They rode south into territory that grew increasingly rugged. The medicine wheel guided them through narrow canyons and across mesas that commanded sweeping views of the desert. Miguel rode quietly, occasionally asking questions about landmarks, but mostly just observing. After 2 hours, the medicine wheel led them to a box canyon that ended in a wall of layered sandstone. At first glance, it seemed like a dead end, but Kaya approached the rock face and began pawing at a section covered by fallen boulders. "Help me move these," Kiona told Miguel, dismounting. As they cleared away the rocks, an opening appeared. Not a natural cave, but a constructed entrance with worked stone around the frame. Ancient Apache symbols were carved into the stone lintel. "Someone built this," Miguel whispered, running his hands over the carved symbols. "This is real archaeology, not just folklore." Inside, the passage opened into a circular chamber with a domed ceiling. The walls were covered with pictographs depicting Apache ceremonies, astronomical observations, and maps of the surrounding territory. Most remarkably, the floor was dominated by a large stone platform with carved grooves that formed intricate patterns. "It's a calendar," Miguel said, his skepticism forgotten. "These grooves track the movement of the sun throughout the year. This place is incredibly sophisticated." As Kiona stepped onto the platform, the sacred paint on his face began to tingle. Images flooded his mind. Apache astronomers using this chamber to predict seasons, plan ceremonies, and maintain spiritual balance. He saw his great-great-grandfather performing rituals here, calling upon celestial powers to protect their people. "The third sight," he breathed. "This is where earth energy connects with sky energy." Miguel was examining the pictographs with new respect. "How old is this place?" "Older than memory," came a voice behind them. They spun around to find Joseph Crow Feather standing in the entrance, leaning heavily on his walking stick. The elderly man had somehow followed them despite his age and physical limitations. "Joseph!" Rosa exclaimed, emerging from behind him. "You shouldn't have made this climb." "Some things are worth the effort," Joseph replied, his eyes fixed on the chamber around them. "I have heard stories of this place my entire life, but never thought I would see it." Joseph approached the platform slowly, reverence clear in his movement. "My grandfather told me that Apache shamans used this chamber to speak with star spirits. They could predict weather patterns, know when enemies were approaching, even see events that hadn't happened yet." "You mean prophecy?" Miguel asked. "I mean connection," Joseph corrected. "Connection to patterns too large for ordinary human perception. Your great-great-grandfather could see the web of relationships that connect all things, past, present, and future." As if responding to Joseph's words, the chamber began to change. The late afternoon sun, streaming through openings in the dome, struck the carved patterns on the floor and created moving shadows that seemed to dance with meaning. Kiona felt drawn to the center of the platform. When he reached the focal point, images exploded through his consciousness. He saw mining equipment destroying the sacred spring. He saw bulldozers crushing the cave behind the waterfall. He saw this very chamber being dynamited to access copper deposits beneath it, but he also saw something else, a way to prevent these disasters. "The fourth site," he gasped, swaying on his feet. "I can see where it is." Rosa steadied him as the visions faded. "What did you see?" "The pattern," Kiona replied, his voice weak from the spiritual effort. "All 4 sites are connected by underground energy channels. If I can reactivate all of them, they create a protective barrier that mining equipment can't cross." Miguel was staring at him with a mixture of awe and concern. "You really can see things, can't you? This isn't just tradition or superstition." "No," Kiona said firmly. "It's not." Joseph smiled sadly. "Your cousin is beginning to understand what we've been trying to tell him. Some truths can't be learned from books or computer screens." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Kiona felt a sharp pain in his chest. Something was wrong, not with him, but with the spiritual network he was learning to sense. "The mining equipment," he said urgently. "They're doing something right." "Now!" They rode hard toward the eastern section of the reservation, following Kiona's increasingly frantic directions. What they found confirmed his worst fears. Heavy machinery was already operating near the sacred spring. The crystal-clear pool that had bubbled from solid rock for centuries was now muddy with equipment tracks. "They're not supposed to start until Monday," Miguel said angrily. "They lied," Rosa replied flatly, "just like they always do." Joseph's face was grave as he surveyed the damage. "The spiritual connection to this site has been weakened, but not completely severed. If you can find and activate the 4th site quickly, the protective network might still be repairable." Kiona felt the weight of destiny pressing down on him. 3 sites found, 1 damaged, and the 4th still waiting somewhere in the vast desert. Time was running out, and the fate of his people's most sacred places hung in the balance. Kaya whinnied, urgently, as if sensing his thoughts. In her eyes, he saw the wisdom of his ancestor Ayana, and something else, a warning that the real test was yet to come. Sunday morning, Kiona woke to find Kaya missing from the corral. The gate stood open, but the horse hadn't wandered far. She waited on the trail leading toward the high mountains, saddled and ready as if by invisible hands. Rosa found him staring at the empty corral in bewilderment. "She prepared herself," Rosa observed calmly. "The guardian traditions run deeper than human understanding, grandson. Your horse remembers things that happened before she was born. They rode higher than ever before, into country where few people ventured." The medicine wheel grew almost hot in Kiona's hand as they climbed toward a peak that dominated the eastern skyline. Ancient Apache legends spoke of this mountain as a place where earth touched sky, where spirits gathered to watch over the world below. The trail switchbacked up treacherous slopes where one wrong step meant a 1,000-foot fall. But Kaya moved with supernatural confidence, finding paths that seemed to appear beneath her hooves. As they climbed, Kiona noticed storm clouds building on the horizon despite the morning's clear skies. "Weather's changing," Miguel observed, checking his phone for forecasts. "Says it should be sunny all day, but those clouds look serious." At the summit, they found themselves on a wind-swept plateau scattered with ancient stone formations. At the center stood a natural pillar of red sandstone, perfectly straight and reaching toward the sky like a giant arrow, embedded in the pillars. Peak was something that made Kiona's breath catch, a ceremonial arrow, its obsidian point gleaming in the sunlight. "The thunder arrow," he whispered, recognizing it from his dreams of Ayana. Joseph's stories had mentioned this weapon, a sacred tool that could call upon the power of storms, summon lightning, and command the winds themselves. According to legend, it had been used only once, when Ayana drove off a cavalry unit that threatened sacred burial grounds. As Kiona approached the stone pillar, the clouds above began to swirl more rapidly. The thunder arrow seemed to pulse, with its own energy resonating with the approaching storm. He could feel its power even from a distance, ancient, dangerous, and waiting for someone worthy to claim it. "Don't touch it yet," Rosa warned, sensing his intention. "That weapon carries the strength of sky spirits. Without proper preparation, it could destroy you." Miguel was staring at the approaching storm with growing alarm. "This isn't natural. Weather. Those clouds are moving too fast, rotating too precisely." As if responding to his observation, the first lightning bolt struck the mountain peak less than a mile away. The sound of thunder rolled across the plateau like cannon fire. Gaia stood perfectly still, unafraid of the electrical display gathering above them. "She's calling it," Kiona realized. "Kaya is summoning the storm to show us the thunder arrow's power." The second lightning strike hit much closer, illuminating the plateau in brilliant white light. In that flash, Kiona saw the truth. The storm wasn't approaching randomly. It was being drawn to this place by spiritual forces older than memory. "We need to get down from here," Miguel shouted over the wind. "Lightning always hits the highest points." But Rosa was studying the patterns of the approaching storm with ancient knowledge. "No, this lightning serves a purpose. Watch the strikes. They're following the energy lines that connect all four sacred sites." She was right. Each lightning bolt illuminated a different direction from the mountain peak, marking pathways that led toward the other sacred sites. The storm was revealing the spiritual network that bound them together. Ayana used this place to monitor the entire protection system, Kiona understood. From here, a guardian can see threats to any of the sacred sites. As if to confirm his realization, images flashed through his mind with each lightning strike. He saw mining equipment advancing on the astronomical chamber they had visited yesterday. He saw surveyors approaching the cave behind the waterfall. The mining company wasn't just damaging one site. They were systematically targeting all of them. "They know," he said urgently. "Somehow they know about all four sacred sites." Joseph's face was grim as he processed this information. "There are stories about Apache people who betrayed sacred knowledge to outsiders. Perhaps someone sold information to the mining company." The storm reached its peak intensity, with lightning strikes illuminating the entire valley below. In those brilliant flashes, Kiona could see mining vehicles moving along roads that led directly to each sacred site. The attack was coordinated, planned, and happening right now while they stood on the mountain. "I have to take the thunder arrow," he decided. "It's the only way to stop them." "The power could kill you," Rosa warned. "Your great-great-grandfather spent years learning to channel that kind of spiritual energy." "Then I'll have to learn quickly," Kiona replied, approaching the stone pillar. As his hand closed around the thunder arrow's shaft, electricity coursed through his body. But instead of pain, he felt connection to the storm above, to the sacred sites below, to the spiritual network that protected his people. The weapon seemed to recognize his bloodline, accepting him as Ayana's true successor. The moment he pulled the arrow free from the stone, the storm's intensity doubled. Lightning struck the mountain peak repeatedly, but instead of harming them, the electrical energy flowed through the thunder arrow and into Kiona's awareness. He could see everything, every mining vehicle, every threat to sacred land, every person who worked to destroy what his ancestors had died protecting. "I can stop them," he said, his voice carrying new authority. But not alone. The guardian traditions were never meant for one person to bear. Rosa nodded, understanding. "What do you need?" "Help me perform the protection ceremony. Channel energy from all three sites we've activated into this one. Create a barrier they can't cross." As they began the ritual, Rosa had learned from stories and dreams. The thunder arrow grew brighter. Lightning continued to strike around them, but now it felt controlled, purposeful. The spiritual network was awakening after more than a century of dormancy. Miguel stood watch at the plateau's edge, reporting on the mining vehicles below. "They've stopped," he called out in amazement. "All of them just stopped dead in their tracks." Through the thunder arrow's power, Kiona could sense what was happening. The reawakened spiritual network was creating electromagnetic interference that disabled the mining equipment's electrical systems. Engines died, GPS units failed, and radio communications went silent. But he could also sense something else. The mining company had backup plans. Older equipment that didn't rely on electronics. Manual tools that could still damage sacred sites. The spiritual barrier was powerful, but not invincible. "This buys us time," he told the others, as the storm began to subside. "But it's not a permanent solution. We still need to find and activate the fourth sacred site." Rosa looked toward the valley, where disabled mining vehicles sat motionless on desert roads. "How long do we have?" Kiona felt the answer through his connection to the thunder arrow. "Until tomorrow night. After that, the spiritual energy we've raised will begin to fade. If we can't complete the protection network by then, they'll be back with equipment we can't stop." As they prepared to descend the mountain, Joseph pulled Kiona aside. "You handled that power well, but I can see the strain it put on you. The fourth site will demand even more. Are you prepared for what that might cost?" Kiona looked out over the vast desert where his ancestors had lived and died defending this land. Somewhere out there, the final sacred site waited. And somewhere else, corporate executives were already planning how to overcome the spiritual barriers protecting Apache territory. "I'll pay whatever price is necessary," he replied. "That's what it means to be a guardian." That evening, Joseph brought devastating news. While they had been on the mountain, he had received a call from his nephew, who worked in the tribal government office. "The mining company filed an emergency injunction," Joseph explained, his weathered face grave. "They're claiming supernatural interference with their legal operations. Federal marshals are being sent to investigate." Rosa set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. "They're bringing in federal law enforcement tomorrow morning, and they have court orders authorizing them to arrest anyone found interfering with mining operations." Joseph's voice was heavy with the weight of history. "It's 1886 all over again. Federal agents coming to force Apache people off their own land." Kiona felt the thunder arrow's energy still coursing through him, but it was fading. The weapon lay wrapped in sacred cloth on the kitchen table, no longer glowing with the supernatural power it had displayed on the mountain. "How much time do we have?" "Hours, not days," Joseph replied. "The federal team arrives at dawn." Miguel paced the small living room, his face troubled. "There has to be a legal way to fight this. Environmental protection laws, cultural preservation statutes, something. Legal challenges take months or years," Rosa said quietly. "They need only days to destroy what can never be rebuilt." Joseph nodded grimly. "And federal judges rarely side with tribal interests when corporate profits are at stake." That night, Kiona's dreams were more vivid than ever. Ayana appeared to him not as the confident guardian of previous visions, but as a weary, desperate man facing impossible odds. "The final site is the most dangerous," his ancestor warned. "It contains the memory stone, a crystal that holds the voices of every guardian who came before me." In the dream, Ayana led him to a hidden chamber beneath the earth, accessible only through underwater passages. "The memory stone contains all our knowledge, all our power, all our failures, but it also demands the greatest sacrifice." "What sacrifice?" Kiona asked. Ayana's form began to fade. "To activate the memory stone, a guardian must give up what they love most. For me, it was my life. I died protecting it from cavalry soldiers. For you—" The dream ended abruptly. Kiona woke with a sense of dread that went deeper than fear of federal agents or mining equipment. Whatever the fourth sacred site demanded of him, it would cost more than he wanted to pay. He found Kaya in the corral, but she looked different. Her coat had lost some of its luster, her eyes seemed dimmer, and she moved with less of the supernatural grace he had grown accustomed to. The spiritual energy connecting them was weakening. "She's dying," Rosa said quietly, joining him at the corral fence. "The guardian power is too strong for her physical form to contain indefinitely. She was never meant to carry Ayana's spirit for so long." Kiona's heart clenched. "How long does she have?" "Days, perhaps less." The spiritual connection that allows her to guide you is consuming her life force. There has to be another way. There is, Rosa interrupted. Complete the Guardian network. Activate all 4 sacred sites. When the spiritual protection is in place, Ayana's spirit can rest, and Kaya can return to being an ordinary horse. But if I don't complete it in time, Rosa's silence was answer enough. As dawn approached, the sound of helicopters echoed across the desert. Federal agents were arriving exactly as Joseph had predicted. Through binoculars, Miguel counted 4 aircraft and at least 20 personnel in tactical gear. "They're not taking any chances," he observed grimly. Joseph had spent the night translating more of Ayana's scrolls. "I found references to the Memory Stone's location," he announced. "It's hidden beneath Serpent Lake, in an air pocket that can only be reached by diving through underwater caverns." Serpent Lake lay in a remote canyon on the far western edge of the reservation, a deep, spring-fed pool that had been considered sacred by Apache people for centuries. Legend said it was bottomless, home to water spirits that could grant visions or claim lives depending on the seeker's intentions. "I can't swim well enough for cave diving," Kiona admitted, "and we don't have the equipment. The Guardian doesn't." "You need equipment," Joseph said, pointing to symbols on the scroll. "These markings suggest Ayana could breathe underwater when performing sacred rituals. The spiritual connection changes your physical limitations." Miguel stared at them in disbelief. "You're talking about sending a 14-year-old boy to dive into an underwater cave system based on century-old legends." "I'm talking about the only way to save our sacred places," Rosa replied firmly. "The federal agents will be here within hours. The mining company has equipment that our thunderstorm tricks can't stop. This is our last chance." As they prepared to leave for Serpent Lake, Kiona noticed Kaya could barely stand. The proud horse, who had led him to 3 sacred sites, was now dependent on his support just to walk. Every step seemed to cause her pain, but her eyes still held. "Ayana's ancient wisdom. I'm killing her," Kiona said, anguish clear in his voice. "No," Rosa corrected gently. "She's choosing to sacrifice herself for our people, just as Ayana did. That's what Guardians do. They give up their own desires for the greater good." The ride to Serpent Lake took 3 hours through rough terrain, with Kaya needing frequent rest stops. By the time they reached the canyon rim, federal helicopters were visible in the distance, systematically searching the reservation. Serpent Lake stretched before them, a perfect circle of deep blue water surrounded by vertical rock walls. No visible outlet explained where the water went, adding to the lake's mysterious reputation. According to Apache stories, it was a window into the underworld, a place where spirits gathered to watch the world above. Joseph studied the scrolls. One final time. The Memory Stone chamber is directly beneath the lake's center, but the entrance is 40 feet down, accessible only when the seeker has been prepared through traditional ceremonies. "What kind of preparation?" Kiona asked. Rosa was already mixing the sacred paints, this time using symbols he had never seen before. "These markings will allow you to breathe underwater and see in absolute darkness. But they come with a cost." "What cost?" "The same cost every Guardian has paid. To use the Memory Stone's power, you must be willing to lose what matters most to you." Kiona looked at Kaya, swaying on her feet despite his support. He was beginning to understand what the final sacrifice would be. To complete his destiny as Guardian, he would have to let his beloved horse and the spirit of his ancestor go forever. As Rosa painted the underwater breathing symbols on his chest and arms, federal helicopters grew closer. Time was running out, and the most dangerous part of his journey was about to begin. The water of Serpent Lake was impossibly clear and cold. As Kiona dove toward its depths, the sacred paint Rosa had applied to his skin glowed with soft bioluminescence, allowing him to breathe underwater and see in the darkness below. As he descended, the lake revealed secrets hidden for centuries. At 30 feet, he found the first surprise, ancient stone structures built into the lake's walls. Not natural caverns, but deliberately constructed chambers with Apache symbols carved into every surface. At 40 feet, exactly where Joseph's translation had predicted, an opening led into an air-filled tunnel. Kiona surfaced in a vast underground chamber lit by crystals embedded in the walls. The air was fresh, despite being trapped beneath tons of rock and water. At the chamber's center stood a pillar of pure quartz taller than a man, pulsing with inner light, the memory stone. But he was not alone in the chamber. "I was wondering when you would arrive," said a familiar voice. Kiona spun around to find Peterson, the mining company spokesman, standing calmly beside the memory stone. The man was perfectly dry, despite having somehow made the same underwater journey Kiona had just completed. "How are you here?" Kiona demanded, his voice echoing in the crystal chamber. Peterson smiled, but now his expression held none of the corporate politeness he had displayed at the tribal council meeting. "The same way my great-great-grandfather was here in 1886, hunting. Apache guardians who threatened our family's interests." Understanding hit Kiona like a physical blow. "You're descended from the cavalry officers who killed Ayana. Captain William Peterson, 7th Cavalry," the man confirmed with evident pride. "He spent years tracking your ancestor, learning about the sacred sites, studying how guardian power worked. When he finally cornered Ayana in this very chamber, he thought he had won." Peterson walked slowly around the memory stone, his fingers trailing over its crystalline surface. "But Ayana activated the memory stone before he died, sealing the sacred sites and creating a spiritual barrier my great-great-grandfather could never overcome. Our family has been waiting 5 generations for that barrier to weaken enough for us to return. The mining company is just a cover," Kiona realized. "Copper Ridge mining is entirely legitimate. We do extract copper from sites across the southwest. But this location was always about something more valuable than metal." Peterson's eyes gleamed with avarice. "The memory stone contains the accumulated knowledge of every Apache guardian who ever lived. Shamanic wisdom, spiritual techniques, power over natural forces. Imagine what such knowledge is worth to the right buyers." Kiona felt sick. "You want to steal our ancestors' wisdom and sell it. I want to complete what my great-great-grandfather started. The Apache people have hoarded spiritual knowledge for centuries, while the world suffered from wars, disasters, and environmental collapse. That knowledge belongs to humanity, not to one small tribe clinging to the past. That knowledge belongs to the people who earned it through sacrifice and service," Kiona shot back. "My ancestors died protecting it from men like you." Peterson laughed coldly. "Your ancestors died because they couldn't accept progress. Just like you're about to die for the same reason." As Peterson spoke, Kiona noticed something that made his blood run cold. The man cast no reflection in the memory stone's crystalline surface. Either Peterson was some kind of supernatural entity, or "You're not really here," Kiona said suddenly. "You're a projection from the memory stone itself." Peterson's form flickered slightly, confirming Kiona's suspicion. "Very perceptive. The memory stone doesn't just contain guardian knowledge, it contains the spiritual echoes of everyone who has ever entered this chamber, including my great-great-grandfather, whose hatred for Apache guardians has festered here for over a century." The chamber began to change around them. The crystalline walls showed images from the past, scenes of the final battle between Ayana and Captain Peterson in 1886. Kiona watched in horror as his ancestor fought desperately to protect the memory stone, while cavalry soldiers destroyed sacred artifacts and killed Apache defenders. "Ayana won that battle," Peterson's projection continued, "but at a terrible cost. To activate the memory stone's protection, he had to sacrifice not just his own life, but the life of his spirit horse, the animal that had guided him to each sacred sight that had carried his ancestors' wisdom. He had to let it die to power the crystal's defenses. Kiona's heart clenched as understanding dawned. Kaya, I have to sacrifice Kaya to activate the memory stone. Just as Ayana sacrificed his horse. The guardian power demands the death of what you love most. But here's the beautiful irony. Peterson's projection grinned maliciously. The moment you activate the memory stone, I'll have access to all. It's knowledge. Your sacrifice will give me everything I came here to steal. The chamber filled with new voices, whispers from every guardian who had ever touched the memory stone. They spoke in Apache, in languages older than Apache, in sounds that bypassed human speech entirely. Through the cacophony, Kiona heard Ayana's voice calling to him. Grandson, do not listen to the Shadow Man's lies. The memory stone's power is not what he thinks it is. Peterson's projection snarled at the sound of Ayana's voice. Impossible. I destroyed his spiritual echo decades ago. But Ayana's presence grew stronger, and Kiona began to understand the truth. The memory stone didn't just store knowledge. It stored the living spirits of guardians who had willingly merged with its power. They weren't dead. They had become part of something larger. The real Peterson died in a mining accident 20 years ago. Ayana's voice continued. What you're facing is his descendants' greed, given supernatural form by proximity to the memory stone. It feeds on the desire to possess what cannot be owned. The Peterson projection's form began to shift and distort, revealing its true nature. It was made of shadows and hunger, corporate ambition given supernatural form through generations of resentment. You can't stop me, it hissed. The moment you touch the memory stone, I'll have everything your people tried to hide. But Kiona was beginning to understand something the shadow didn't. The memory stone's power wasn't about possession or control. It was about connection and sacrifice. Not the death of what you loved, but the willingness to transform that love into something greater. Above them, explosions echoed through the water. Federal agents were using underwater charges to search for hidden chambers. Time was running out, and Kiona had to make the most important decision of his life. As he approached the memory stone, he felt Kaya's presence, even though she waited. Far above, beside Serpent Lake, their connection transcended physical distance, and through that connection he finally understood what the fourth sacred site truly demanded, not death, but transformation. The explosions above grew closer as federal agents used underwater charges to search for the hidden chamber. Each blast sent shockwaves through the water, causing the memory stone to pulse with brighter light. The Peterson shadow circled the crystal like a predator, its form becoming more solid as its hunger intensified. They'll find this place soon, the shadow hissed, and when they do, they'll seal it forever. Your only chance is to activate the memory stone now, while you still can. But Kiona could sense something the shadow couldn't. Rosa, Miguel, and Joseph were performing their own ceremony beside Serpent Lake above. Through the water, their voices reached him in traditional Apache chants he had heard since childhood. They were preparing the Unity Feather, the final artifact he had discovered in Ayana's chest. The Unity Feather was unlike the other Guardian tools. Where the medicine wheel guided, the sacred paint connected, and the thunder arrow commanded, the Unity Feather transformed. It could bind all four sacred sites into a single protective network, but only if the Guardian was willing to become part of that network forever. You feel it, don't you? Ayana's spirit spoke directly into Kiona's mind. The call to join us in the memory stone, to become one with all the Guardians who came before. Above the water's surface, Kaya collapsed. Even 40 feet down and surrounded by stone and crystal, Kiona felt her life force failing. The connection between them had sustained her far beyond a normal horse's limits, but now that borrowed time was ending. She's dying because of you, the Peterson shadow taunted. Your selfish desire to be special is killing the only thing you truly love. The accusation hit home because it contained truth. Kiona had enjoyed being chosen, being the one person who could see what others couldn't, who could wield powers his ancestors had used to protect their people. But that enjoyment had come at Kaya's expense. Through the memory stone's crystalline surface, more visions appeared. Kiona saw the truth about Ayana's final battle. His ancestor hadn't sacrificed his horse to activate the memory stone. He had merged with the animal's spirit, creating a connection that transcended death itself. The horse that had guided Kiona for months wasn't just carrying Ayana's spirit, it was Ayana, transformed and reborn through love and sacrifice. The Guardian. Power isn't about controlling spiritual forces, Kiona realized aloud. It's about becoming one with them. The Peterson shadow recoiled as understanding changed the chamber's spiritual atmosphere. No, the power is meant to be taken, used, owned. But ownership was the opposite of guardian wisdom. As Kiona placed his hands on the memory stone, he felt the presence of dozens of guardians who had chosen transformation over possession, service over self-interest. They had become part of the land they protected, their spirits flowing through the network that connected all 4 sacred sites. Above, another explosion sent cracks through the chamber's ceiling. Water began to seep through fissures in the stone, threatening to flood the air pocket that made survival possible. Federal agents were close to discovering the entrance, and when they did, they would bring equipment capable of draining the entire lake if necessary. "Time grows short, grandson," Ayana's voice urged. "The choice must be made now." Kiona understood the choice clearly. He could activate the memory stone and join the eternal network of guardian spirits, protecting the sacred sites forever, but leaving behind his human life. Or he could refuse, let the sites be destroyed, and preserve his individual existence while his people lost their most sacred heritage. But as he prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, Rosa's voice reached him, through the water with words that changed everything. "The unity feather doesn't require death, grandson. It requires trust." Through the memory stone's power, Kiona saw what Rosa meant. The unity feather could bind the 4 sacred sites without requiring the guardian to abandon physical form. But it demanded something equally difficult: complete faith in the spiritual network, total surrender of the need to control outcomes. "Use the feather," Ayana's spirit advised, "but know that once activated, the protection cannot be undone. The sacred sites will be sealed from all interference, but the guardian who creates that seal will be forever changed." The Peterson shadow sensed the shift in Kiona's intention and grew desperate. "You don't understand what you're giving up. The power to command storms, to see across vast distances, to speak with spirits, all of it will be gone." "No," Kiona replied, finally understanding the true nature of guardian power. "It will be shared." He removed the unity feather from his medicine bundle. The artifact glowed with soft light that seemed to contain every color at once. As he held it above the memory stone, the feather began to change, its physical form dissolving into pure energy that connected to the spiritual network flowing beneath the reservation. Through that connection, Kiona felt Miguel's newfound respect for Apache traditions, Joseph's lifetime of preserved wisdom, Rosa's fierce love for her people, and most powerfully, Kaya's absolute devotion transcending the boundaries between human and animal consciousness. The network doesn't need one guardian, he realized. It needs all of us, working together. Above the lake, Rosa felt the shift as the unity feather activated. The thunder arrow in her hands began to glow, no longer requiring Kiona's direct control. Miguel, who had never believed in spiritual matters, found himself able to sense the locations of all 4 sacred sites. Joseph felt decades of knowledge flowing into perfect clarity, and Kaya, moments from death, felt new strength flowing through her, as the burden of carrying Ayana's spirit alone was shared among all who loved the land enough to protect it. The Peterson shadow let out a shriek of rage as the chamber filled with light from the memory stone. "This isn't over. My family will find another way." But as the Unity Feather's power spread through the spiritual network, the shadow began to dissolve. Centuries of accumulated greed and resentment couldn't survive in the presence of freely shared love and sacrifice. Water continued pouring through ceiling cracks as federal agents located the chamber's entrance. But Kiona no longer felt trapped. The Unity Feather had shown him that guardian power was never about fighting enemies. It was about creating connections strong enough to outlast any opposition. As he prepared to swim back to the surface and face whatever consequences awaited, he felt the presence of every guardian who had ever protected these lands. They weren't dead and gone. They were part of something eternal, something that would continue long after corporate greed and government policies had been forgotten. Peace, Holmes. Real test was just beginning. As dawn broke over Serpent Lake, the Unity Feather's power reached its peak. Kiona felt the Windwalker's staff materializing in his hands, a final artifact that had appeared only when all other Guardian tools were activated simultaneously. The staff pulsed with combined energies from the Medicine Wheel, Sacred Paint, Thunder Arrow, and Unity Feather, creating a conduit for power beyond anything one person could safely channel alone. But above the surface, that power was being shared, exactly as it should be. Rosa stood at the lake's eastern shore, the Thunder Arrow crackling with controlled lightning that formed protective barriers around each sacred site. Miguel, his skepticism transformed into newfound purpose, used the Medicine Wheel's guidance to coordinate their defenses from the southern position. Joseph, despite his age, moved with renewed strength as generations of guardian wisdom flowed through him at the western point. The federal agents' helicopters approached the lake in formation, their equipment designed to penetrate any natural barrier. But as they crossed into the airspace above the sacred sites, their instruments began failing. GPS systems showed impossible readings, radio communications filled with static that sounded like ancient Apache chants. Engine systems fluctuated as electromagnetic fields disrupted their electronics. "What the hell is happening down there?" the lead pilot radioed, fighting to maintain control as his aircraft bucked against invisible currents. Below the surface, Kiona felt every moment of their confusion through the Windwalker's staff. The weapon allowed him to direct elemental forces with precision, not to destroy, but to defend. Air currents pushed aircraft away from sacred areas. Water levels rose to flood access roads. Earth trembled just enough to make heavy equipment unstable. The Peterson Shadow made one final desperate attempt to seize control. The staff's power flows through you, it shrieked. "I can take it if you die." But as the shadow lunged toward Kiona, it met resistance from an unexpected source. The Memory Stone erupted with brilliant light as every guardian spirit who had ever merged with its power joined the defense. Ayana's presence became visible, along with dozens of others, stretching back through centuries of Apache history. "You cannot possess what is freely given," Ayana declared, his spirit form blazing with righteous authority. "The guardian power belongs to the land itself, not to those who would exploit it." The combined spiritual energy of all past guardians surrounded the Peterson Shadow like a cage of light. For the first time since entering the chamber, the manifestation of corporate greed showed fear. "This isn't possible," it gasped. "Individual spirits can't combine their power like this." "Individual spirits cannot," Ayana agreed. "But we are no longer individual. We are part of something greater than ourselves." Above the lake, the federal agents were discovering the limits of their authority. Every piece of equipment they deployed near the sacred sites failed in ways that defied explanation. Boats stopped dead in the water, diving gear malfunctioned, even simple tools like shovels broke when used to dig in protected areas. Agent Morrison, the operations commander, stood on the lake's shore studying readings that made no sense. "Sir," his communications specialist reported, "we're getting electromagnetic signatures consistent with military-grade jamming equipment, but the signals are coming from underground. Underground facilities would show up on our geological surveys." Morrison replied, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Not if they're natural formations enhanced by... The specialist paused, unwilling to voice what the evidence suggested. Sir, these readings are consistent with piezoelectric effects from crystal formations, but the power levels are impossible unless... Unless what? Unless something is actively channeling electrical current through them. In the underwater chamber, Kiona felt the federal agents' growing bewilderment through the Windwalker's staff. Their scientific instruments could detect the energy flowing through the sacred network. But science had no framework for understanding power driven by love, sacrifice, and spiritual connection rather than technology. The memory stone began to sing, a harmonic resonance that traveled through water and stone to reach the surface. Above the lake, Rosa heard it first, recognizing the ceremonial song her grandmother had hummed while grinding corn. Miguel heard it as the lullaby his Apache mother had sung before she died. Joseph heard it as the victory chant his grandfather had described from the old days, when Apache warriors returned from successful raids. Each person heard something different, but all heard something that connected them to their deepest sense of belonging to this land. The federal helicopters began experiencing more severe malfunctions, not destructive failures that would cause crashes, but precisely targeted disruptions that made continued operations impossible. Fuel gauges showed empty tanks despite recently refueling. Navigation systems directed them in circles. Communication equipment transmitted only static, mixed with what sounded like traditional Apache music. "We need to withdraw and reassess," Agent Morrison finally decided. Whatever's causing these equipment failures could pose safety risks to personnel. As the federal forces retreated, the Peterson Shadow made one last desperate attack on Kiona, but the young Guardian was no longer alone in the chamber. The spirits of every previous Guardian stood with him, their combined strength creating an unbreachable barrier around the memory stone. "The sacred sites are protected," Kiona declared, raising the Windwalker's staff, "now and forever." But even as he spoke those words, he felt the terrible cost of channeling such enormous power through his human form. The staff was burning through his life force at an unsustainable rate. Above the surface, he sensed Kaya collapsing as the spiritual connection between them reached its absolute limit. The Unity Feather had prevented the need for ultimate sacrifice, but it couldn't eliminate all consequences. Someone still had to pay the price for wielding power that mortal forms weren't meant to contain. The eternal flame ignited without warning, erupting from the memory stone in a pillar of fire that somehow burned underwater without consuming oxygen or producing heat. The flame was pure spiritual energy made visible, and as it touched the wind, Walker's staff in Kiona's hands, power beyond human comprehension, flowed through the sacred network. Above the surface, Rosa felt the change immediately. The thunder arrow in her grasp became weightless, its electrical energy spreading outward, in spirals of light that connected all 4 sacred sites. At each location, similar flames appeared, not destroying but transforming. The muddy pool where mining equipment had damaged the sacred spring cleared instantly, its water becoming more pure than it had been in decades. Miguel watched in amazement as the flame reached the astronomical chamber. The ancient pictographs on the cave walls began glowing with their own inner light, creating patterns that seemed to move and breathe. "The whole mountain is lighting up," he called out over their radio connection. At the waterfall cave, Joseph witnessed the most remarkable transformation. The flame caused new springs to emerge from the rock walls, creating a cascade of blessed water that would make this site even more sacred than before. "The ancestors are completing what they started," he whispered, tears streaming down his weathered face. But in the underwater chamber, Kiona was paying the ultimate price for channeling the eternal flame. His physical form couldn't contain spiritual energy of this magnitude. He could feel his life force being consumed, transformed into the power that was sealing the sacred sites forever. "Grandfather," he called out to Ayana's spirit. "I don't think I can survive this." Ayana's presence surrounded him with warmth and love. "You were never meant to survive it unchanged, grandson. But survival and death are not the only possibilities." As the eternal flame reached its peak intensity, Kiona finally understood what Ayana meant. The flame wasn't consuming his life, it was offering him the choice to transform it. He could become part of the sacred network voluntarily, maintaining his consciousness while gaining the immortal ability to protect these lands forever. Above the lake, Kaya struggled to her feet despite her failing strength. The horse that had carried Ayana's spirit for months finally had the opportunity to complete her purpose. As the eternal flame spread across the surface of Serpent Lake, she walked into the blessed water without fear. Rosa tried to stop her. "Kaya, no!" But the horse turned back with eyes that held perfect understanding. This wasn't death she was choosing, it was transformation. As she waded deeper into the lake, her physical form began to dissolve into points of light that merged with the eternal flame. Through the water walker's staff, Kiona felt Kaya's choice resonate through his own consciousness. She was showing him the way, not death, not abandonment of everything he loved, but transformation into something that could love more completely than any single individual ever could. "Together," he whispered, making his decision. The moment Kiona accepted transformation, the eternal flame exploded outward with joy rather than destruction. Every person connected to the sacred network felt the change. Rosa's grief at losing, Kaya transformed into wonder as she realized the horse's spirit was now part of the wind that moved through every canyon on the reservation. Miguel's newfound faith was strengthened as he felt his ancestors' presence in every stone and stream. Joseph's lifelong dedication was rewarded as he sensed the completion of guardian work that had taken centuries to accomplish. The federal agents, now miles away from the lake, watched in bewilderment as their long-range sensors detected an energy signature that defied all scientific explanation. The 4 sacred sites were generating a field that their instruments read as a single, impossibly powerful entity. It's like the entire eastern section of the reservation has become one giant electromagnetic anomaly, Agent Morrison's scientist reported. "Our equipment can't function anywhere near it. Recommend we classify the area as a natural hazard zone and withdraw permanently," Morrison decided. "Whatever's generating this field, it's beyond our current capabilities to understand or control." In the underwater chamber, now blazing with the light of the eternal flame, Kiona felt his physical form dissolving just as Kaya's had. But instead of fear, he experienced profound peace. His consciousness wasn't ending, it was expanding, becoming part of something vast and eternal. Through the memory stone's crystalline matrix, he could perceive the entire reservation simultaneously. Every animal, every plant, every person who called this land home was now connected to his awareness. He could sense Miguel's determination to learn more Apache traditions, Rosa's quiet joy at seeing ancient prophecies fulfilled, Joseph's satisfaction at completing his grandfather's unfinished work. Most remarkably, he could feel Kaya's presence throughout the network. The horse hadn't died. She had become the spirit of movement and guidance that would help future generations find their way across sacred lands. Her intelligence and love were now woven into every path, every hidden spring, every secret place where Apache people might need protection. The Peterson shadow had been completely dissolved by the eternal flame, but Kiona felt no triumph over its destruction. The shadow had been created by human greed and resentment, emotions that would always exist in some form. The sacred network's purpose wasn't to destroy such feelings, but to offer alternatives, connection instead of possession, service instead of exploitation, love instead of fear. As the eternal flame reached its ultimate peak, sealing the protective barriers around all 4 sacred sites permanently, Kiona felt his individual identity merge completely with the Guardian network. He was no longer Kiona, the 14-year-old Apache boy. He was the living spirit of the land itself, conscious and protective, eternal and loving. The transformation was complete. 3 months had passed since the morning when federal agents retreated from Serpent Lake, leaving behind equipment they couldn't explain and reports they couldn't file. In the official records, the eastern section of the Mescalero Apache Reservation was now classified as a natural electromagnetic anomaly zone, unsuitable for mining operations. Copper Ridge Mining Company had quietly withdrawn their proposal, citing unforeseen geological complications. Rosa sat on her porch in the early morning light, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and red. The chest that had started everything was open beside her, but now it contained something new, a leather-bound journal that wrote itself, recording events as they happened across the sacred network. The new Guardian's journal had appeared the day after the eternal flame sealed the 4 sacred sites. Each morning, Rosa found new entries written in Kiona's familiar handwriting, but describing experiences no human boy could have. Today's entry read, "The elk herds are moving early this year. I can feel their need for the high meadows, where the grass grows sweeter. I'll make sure the springs flow clear for their journey." Miguel's boots echoed on the porch steps as he climbed to join his grandmother. At 25, he moved with new purpose, having accepted a position on the tribal council where his business skills could serve Apache interests rather than corporate ones. In his hands, he carried copies of legal documents that would have seemed impossible just 3 months ago. The federal government wants to declare the eastern section a national sacred site, he announced, settling into the chair beside Rosa. Full protection under the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, plus funding for cultural preservation programs. Rosa smiled without looking up from the journal. Your cousin's influence reaches further than we imagined. Through the sacred network, she could feel Kiona's presence throughout the reservation. Not gone, but transformed into something larger than individual consciousness. He was the wind that warned of approaching storms, the intuition that guided hunters to game, the dreams that reminded young people of their heritage. Joseph Crow Feather walked slowly up the path, moving better than he had in years. The spiritual energy flowing through the Guardian network had renewed his strength and clarity, allowing him to share knowledge he had feared would die with him. Under his arm, he carried a bundle of papers covered with Apache symbols. The translation is complete, he announced, settling carefully into a third chair. All of Ayana's scrolls have been deciphered, and the results are remarkable. He left instructions for maintaining the sacred network, performing protective ceremonies, and training future guardians when the time comes. Future guardians, Miguel asked. I thought Kiona completed the network permanently. Joseph shook his head. The network is permanent, but each generation needs people who can communicate with it, interpret its guidance, and help others understand their connection to the land. That responsibility will fall to those who carry the Guardian bloodline. Rosa nodded toward the corral, where new horses had appeared over the past weeks. Unlike ordinary Mustangs, these animals sought out human contact and seemed to understand. Apache words better than English. Kaya's influence is spreading. She's calling others who can serve as bridges between the spirit world and our physical realm. One of the new horses, a young mare with intelligent eyes that reminded everyone of Kaya, approached the porch fence. Rosa stood and walked over to stroke the animal's neck. Through that contact, she felt a familiar presence. Not Kaya exactly, but something that carried Kaya's love and wisdom. She's trying to tell us something, Rosa said, her hand still on the mare's neck. The mare turned and looked directly at Miguel, then back at Rosa, then toward the trail that led to the high country. The message was clear. You want Miguel to ride with you, Rosa interpreted. Miguel stood slowly, uncertainty clear in his expression. I'm not like Kiona. "I don't have any special spiritual gifts." But as he approached the mare, she lowered her head in a gesture of acceptance and trust. When his hand touched her mane, Miguel felt something he had never experienced, a sense of connection to the land that went deeper than ownership or economics, a belonging that came from being part of something larger than individual ambition. "The gifts awaken when they're needed," Joseph observed, "and our people need leaders who understand both the ancient ways and the modern challenges we face." That afternoon, Miguel rode with the mare into the high country, following trails that seemed to reveal themselves with each step. The Guardian network guided him to a hidden valley where ancient Apache dwellings remained intact, preserved by spiritual forces that had kept them hidden from all previous explorers. In the ruins, he found pottery, tools, and artwork that told the story of his ancestors with unprecedented detail. More importantly, he found a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life since leaving the reservation for the corporate world. As evening approached, Rosa sat beside Serpent Lake, now completely clear and reflecting the stars like a mirror. The water no longer held any trace of the underwater chamber where Kiona had made his final choice. That portal between worlds had served its purpose and sealed itself. But sometimes, when the light was just right, she could see ripples in the lake's surface that formed patterns, messages from her grandson, assuring her that love transformed but never truly ended. The journal beside her filled with new writing. "Tell Miguel that tomorrow he should visit the third sacred site. The astronomical chamber has more to teach him about predicting weather, patterns, and understanding celestial cycles. Our people need leaders who can plan decades ahead, not just for next quarter's profits." Rosa chuckled softly. Even in his transformed state, Kiona remained focused on practical matters. Some things never changed. A year later, the Mescalero Apache Reservation had become a model for sustainable development that honored both tradition and progress. Tourism brought revenue without damaging sacred sites. Educational programs taught Apache youth about their heritage while preparing them for modern careers. The legal protections surrounding the eastern section had expanded to cover traditional hunting grounds and ceremonial areas throughout the southwest. Miguel had become the youngest council member in tribal history, using his Guardian-enhanced understanding of natural cycles to develop agricultural and water management programs that neighboring communities sought to emulate. His connection to the sacred network allowed him to predict weather patterns, locate water sources, and sense environmental changes months before they became apparent to others. Rosa continued to translate Ayana's scrolls, working with Joseph to preserve Guardian knowledge for future generations. The new Guardian's journal recorded everything, ensuring that the wisdom gained through sacrifice would never be lost again. And throughout the reservation, people reported dreams of a young Apache boy riding a chestnut horse, guiding them to discoveries that strengthened their connection to ancestral lands. Children found arrowheads that led to stories about family history. Hunters discovered game trails that connected them to traditional knowledge their grandparents thought was forgotten. Teenagers struggling with questions about identity received dreams that helped them understand their place in the long continuity of Apache culture. The sacred sites remained protected, not by government decree or corporate restraint, but by spiritual forces that made exploitation impossible and unnecessary. The land itself had become the guardian, conscious and protective, loving and eternal. Sometimes, in the early morning light, visitors to Serpent Lake reported seeing the reflection of a boy and his horse in the water's surface, not as ghosts, but as reminders that love, once freely given, transforms into something that can never be destroyed or taken away. The ancient promise had been kept. The sacred places would endure, and future generations would inherit not just land, but the living wisdom of ancestors who had chosen transformation over surrender, connection over possession, and love over fear. The Guardian's work was complete, but the guardian's presence would continue forever.